Well, you're a good sibling. Absolutely a good sibling.
All right, Logan and Keely, your first in here. Everybody else comes in. What do they need to know, Logan?
Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Well, Miss Marion, we should leave off them there, Vixen. Come and have a hand chat today.
What a strange man you are. First you are so bashful you would hardly speak. Now you are here every day.
Well, I hate to say to you, and you move around so smile on that hand, air, you just takes the gums to ride.
Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. And this is the show.
Oh, I don't know, Miss Marion.
I'm just worried about the Lincoln thing. What will I do then?
Sit back,
Oh, I
relax,
don't
and
know.
enjoy the show. Yeah, I guess they've been down by.
Oh, don't do that, Miss Marion. See, I feel kind of off, but now I work like last year with all them great folks. Like everything's good. Occasional soft spot on everybody's head, all they ain't got color to keep changing. But here, you're right.
Throw away that stick and put away your knife like a good boy. Oh, you want this dress?
Sit back, relax, and enjoy the
All
show.
they do, Miss Marion, how it helps me to keep my eyes off.
But you need to keep your eyes off me.
Oh, I'm afraid I must. These guys of mine are all too tell. Well, they might be saying things we might not want to hear.
Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. This is the show.
I just have to go on home feeling about as small as a tadpole.
Don't be alarmed. I don't think I shall miss this. At least I'll put your eyes on
Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Well, they weren't. I took them out and took them in the first hatch I took.
And now, tell me how I get over there. If I close my eyes and look fancy, I see your home. Well, you and your brothers, you don't come in it too. Your two sisters run about in the sunbonnet.
They're big man, yes.
And then how we got bustled about to the fest. Well, your good old mother took the stuff down. Please, you don't get the charge. I need you to come back. Walk already.
Well, I wish I could make you whole. You know something, Miss Marion? You are a late tracks. We gone up and everywhere. We roll on the lake of the drunk. Why? We're wrong above everyone. If you had to be there. I'm working out, be there. Oh, she ain't half, not as high. Besides, they all see you.
Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. This show.
Well, yes, there was him, but then there was.
Welcome to Thursday. Sit back, relax,
And watch
and enjoy the show.
He was really hot. But game is a bicycle, and it's great as a car. Well, way we figured that he got pretty angry at his relation back here. Picked up and went over to America. Look at his original branch, man. That's our branch. Oh, yes, quite a few of them. Never read it, though. Took it in the fire. Yes. See, way we reckon, he got pretty mad at her. She married in his will, walking. He was always just lusty. See, every year, he just got lustier and lustier and goofier every fall. See, it always took him this fall. Well, this year's past has come down real bad with the gate. He was so far gone, the doctors, they just gave up the treatment. Mother, she ran along the veteran ministry. While she was out, the old squire called me. And I heard his voice singing loud and clear. Come in, little boy.
gang, gang. Woo!
Okay.
Sit down.
Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
And he took out a piece of paper just like this. He said, "Here's your boy. This paper is everywhere, and all my property and everything." Oh, I put up my head about that time. Well, God about him came, and I reckon he had 3 days fight to that old man. So he finally got the upper hand and taking it fast. And he went on his way. Wow. He was changed what he was before. He was this pale.
Where is everybody? Everybody scared of my room?
And from his hair,
Marley knows. Macy knows. No fit checks this time?
And from his big blue eyes, came a pair of
Every time a student is absent, teaching.
and when he spoke, his voice different. I don't know. It was like a fish.
My teacher itself said,
Oh,
They can't get that here because we're not paying them to do that.
praise the Lord.
We are a tiny.
I feel my spirit in the heart of my Lord. But I do not know the life. Breathe me alive, says he. Well, I brought all this piece of right quick.
fuck I didn't teach her.
That paper out.
I didn't get one.
Hey, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
That paper.
Hey, look. Hey, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
They all got COVID.
Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
I'll give it enough. Heck yeah! You can
All right, guys, have a seat. Sit back and relax.
He's jumping out. He's jumping out.
Oh,
He's live.
Hey, Rob. Sorry, y'all. Now, what if we open the door and hit you? You might want to go back around.
he's not going to open this door.
He's coming from the window.
Oh, sorry. Oh, they got a picture of himself up there.
Stand for the pledge of
Is this
allegiance.
everybody? Is this everybody that's in this class?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence.
In a moment of silence, take me to the front.
We just have one announcement this morning. It's SFA forestry field day time. Any SFA members that want to participate in the forestry field day must sign up and reply this week. Everyone have a great day. Good morning, Radio Nation. It is Thursday and it's a big day. Do you realize that this week we are hosting, or we are playing, not hosting all these, 6 soccer games, 2 baseball games, 2 tennis matches, and 8 basketball games, all in a 5-day span. That's a lot of recreation to have going on. So today is a soccer match. We this afternoon we have first day of the Region 1 playoffs for our basketball tournament. So we'll have 4 teams competing tonight. This afternoon starting at 4. Remember, if you are a driver or a pickup, then you need to plan to leave at 2:45 today. A driver or a pickup. If you ride the bus, teachers, these students will stay with you in 4 o'clock until our normal time at 3:10, and then we'll have our normal dismissal. So be aware of that. We are not, Raiders are not playing in the first 2 games today. The 4 o'clock game and the 5:30 game, I believe, are other teams that are playing. So our Lady Raiders will be playing later this evening in the 7-ish game, and then our Gentlemen will be playing in the final game that is scheduled to start around 8:30 this evening. In addition, this weekend, our fishing group, our bass fishing team will be headed out to, I forget what lake, one of those lakes, but going out to be fishing this weekend. So I wish our bass fishing team a big dose of good luck out there catching the fish. Hopefully it's not what we just had to pray about. It's when you catch it, have to prove up. So, lots of things going on, lots of learning going on in the building. Go out and have a wonderful Raider day, and let's all make good choices.
I just want you. People sometimes look pretty off for that, which is very weird.
Okay, guys, enjoy the show.
You wouldn't happen to meet Miss Gusty here now, would you? This gal and that old woman are trying to get me on string. Well, now, if a rough-spun character like me was to come forward as suitor for your daughter's hand, why, you wouldn't treat me the way some gals in Mullet would when they found out I was there for all that property.
I'm sorry I failed to wish our tennis players good luck today. You are over in Jeff Davis County. I think you had just this week, but today is Jeff Davis County. So good luck to our tennis team too.
It's very weird. Oh, delighted.
What the world?
Yes, both but you don't battle fortune, do you, Miss Gusty? You play affection, you do. Well, I'm just filling over with affection, and I'm ready to just pour all over you like apple sass on rose pork.
You are speaking to my daughter and in my presence.
Well, I am simply offering her my hand and my heart just exactly the way she wants them, with nothing in it.
It's not the nasty beast. Sorry. You don't know the manners of polite society.
Don't know the man is a good society, eh? Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal. You stop apologizing, old man.
Sick! Separate! Terrorists! Justice is avenged!
Hey, bro. You can sleep and you jump out of the
No, I'm there.
Hey, it's just me, guys. It's just me. Oh, we really practice this part. Okay. Ta-da! Last for the assassination.
What can I do with all of you? My personal presence?
No. Raise your hand if you haven't worked out enough this month.
So that's what we didn't want to miss? Yep.
Welcome to our class about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Now, I am not John Wilson. I would never shoot the president. That's a good looking fella. It's the glitter for me. Obviously, that was a simulation, and it's over, right? We're not talking about guns and violence and shooting presidents. We are bringing history to life. And today, I know it's going to be sweating. Today, I will be telling you the story of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Now, several of you have tried to get ahead of me on this story. You have asked questions about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and I've answered a little bit. I've answered some of our questions along the way. But today, what's up? He is not here. He's not here. Thanks. But today, we will tell the whole story of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. I got some notes. I got a little follow along. But what we're going to really get to is about a 35-minute episode of a popular TV show that's going to take us back in time. Logan, can I get you a help me out?
I will do it.
Take us back in time. Here, there's yours. Take us back in time, and we are going to consider if we could have prevented the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, would we? If you could go back and change time and change the events of a particular event, would you? So, all that said, let's get through the story so we can understand the story. My mustache fell off because my upper lip was sweating. And once we understand the story, we better understand the show. Riley, catch. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Johnson, you take it, right?
And once we understand the story, we better understand the show. And I do believe this will be one of your favorite learning experiences from the semester. Yes, Riley, this is what you wanted to be here and not miss, and I hope it was worth it to you. Has another teacher ever jumped out of the classroom window? No. In your academic experience?
I apologize, y'all.
Well, that's the story.
Seriously.
That's the story. So you did sit back, you relaxed, you enjoyed the show. You probably didn't know it at the time, but what you were watching was the play that Abraham Lincoln was watching. And I'll tell you all those details. Up to the point, up to the very line at which he was shot. And I'm going to tell you all those details. So you did sit back, you relaxed, you enjoyed the show. Let's talk about our leading man, Abraham Lincoln. Now, we've talked about him in several ways across the past few days. We've been in the Civil War for about 2 weeks now. But today, of course, we're going to talk specifically about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So let me take you to March 4th, 1865. March 4th was Abe Lincoln's second inaugural. And I'm going to be talking about a leading cast of characters. On your notes there, you got a couple of simple questions. And when we get to that main cast of conspirators, you'll fill in what their role was in the conspiracy. March 4th, 1865. This is the day that Lincoln swears in for a second term. He delivers his second inaugural address. And you've seen this picture before. We know that John Wilkes Booth was present in the crowd on that day. He actually was angered by the speech, angered by the message of unity, angered by the message of equality, especially for African Americans. And he said, I want to kill that man, right? And he would about 6 weeks later. So here it is. I'm walking you down the timeline, how we actually get to shots fired. March 20th, 1865. Tell me what you know about the kidnapping of Abraham Lincoln. I'm sure you've talked about this before, right?
No.
You've never talked about the kidnapping of Abraham Lincoln?
No.
Because it didn't happen. I'll move you on that one. He's like, oh. Yeah, it was planned. It was planned, but it never happened. And since it never happened, a lot of times our early education, elementary school, middle school, teaching, we don't talk about the attempted kidnapping of Abraham Lincoln. But March 20th, John Wilkes Booth, his original plan was not to kill the president. His original plan was to kidnap the president, hold him as a hostage, really hold him as ransom, and maybe trade him for some Confederate prisoners of war. Maybe even trade him in exchange for the North backing off and letting the South be their own country. So his original plan was to hold the president as ransom. Now, as it was, on this particular day, John Wilkes Booth had actually even scouted out the president's regular route. He said, okay, I'm pretty sure his carriage is going to pass this road at this time, and we'll be there. We'll jump out. Just like the picture kind of shows, like, stick him out, Mr. President, stick him out. That never happened. You know why? Because Lincoln changed his route on that day. But what I take out of that is sometimes the small decisions we make, go left instead of go right, stay at home instead of go out. Sometimes those small decisions we make can change the course of history. In this case, Lincoln's decision to take a different route on his normal carriage ride protected him from getting kidnapped by John Wilkes Booth and a team of co-conspirators. Now, I today was John Wilkes Booth. But there were more on his team who were trying to assassinate the president, kidnap the president, than just himself. And we will talk about several of those co-conspirators. So March 20th, kind of a failure. Okay, it didn't work out. Knowing what you think, probably knowing John Wilkes Booth, what do you think that did to his ego?
Made it smaller, like he was.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean, he
up.
failed, so what's he want to do now?
Now he really wants to kill him.
Now he really wants to succeed bigger. You're exactly right, Rylan. Now he really wants to succeed. Let me take it to April 2nd, 1865. This is the day that Richmond, Virginia falls to the Union Army. Talked about warfare a lot. I said, I think last week I said that a lot of times warfare is like capture the flag. Rylan, knock it off. A lot of times warfare is like capture the flag. If you capture the enemy's capital, you have a better chance of winning the war. Well, Richmond, Virginia has been the capital of the Confederacy. And finally, it's been really hard for the Union Army to get to it. Finally, April 2nd, 1865, Richmond, Virginia falls to the Union Army. Jefferson Davis, remember him? He starts his escape from Virginia all the way to Georgia. And of course, that's going to end with him getting caught wearing
The woman's dress.
a woman's dress. Yeah, May 10th. Jefferson Davis escaped to the South. John Wilkes Booth, a Southern sympathizer. What do you think his attitude is on this day? Yeah, he's devastated. He's mad. His capital city is burning. But where does he live? Like where? He lives in Washington, D.C. What do you think the attitude of Washington, D.C. is on this day? Happy, celebrating, flags waving, fireworks in the sky, shooting off guns into the sky, something we don't really do today because we know that bullets have to land somewhere. But there was jubilation in Washington, D.C. As a Southern sympathizer, John Wilkes Booth, what do you think his attitude is on that night? It's all the angrier. Yeah, they're celebrating the fall of my capital. Now, he works in Washington, D.C. for his profession as an actor, but he does not have Northern sympathies. He has Southern sympathies. So this just kind of lights the fire all the more. 1 week later, we've already talked about this, General Robert E. Lee surrenders to General U.S. Grant. Hopefully you remember those names. At where? Where's
West
this?
Point. No.
A word.
Oh.
Appomattox. We need to know this one.
Why did I say West Point?
Because I said it like 15 times yesterday. Surrenders at Appomattox. This is effectively the end of the Civil War for the South. There are some other soldiers who have not surrendered yet, but when Lee surrenders 28,000 Confederates in Virginia, it's pretty much the end of the war. And this leads one more thing for John Wilkes Booth being devastated. He doesn't want to admit the war is over. He wants to continue the fighting. And part of that is he thinks if he can still get to the president, the South will still have a chance. So Lee surrendering just fuels that flame one step more. Let me take you now 2 more days. April 11th, 1865. I know I'm saying a lot of days in a row.
Hey, that's my birthday.
Is it? Let me tell you what happened on your birthday then, Rylan. April 11th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln gives his last speech ever. It's not a big speech. It's not in front of a big crowd. He actually, this would not happen today, but he's actually in the White House. There's a crowd gathering below. Okay, news of the surrender is starting to spread, and people are excited. People are happy, right? So there's a crowd gathering at the White House. Again, not something that would happen today. Lots of security. You can't exactly just walk up to the White House. But as it was, there's a crowd gathering underneath, at the White House. He's in the 2nd floor. He opens the window and says, "Hey, onlookers, hello, greetings." And he gives an impromptu speech. Can you imagine the president today? I don't care what president it is. Can you imagine the president today just opening a window and giving a speech? It wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen because people can't get close enough to the White House. But as it was, this is Lincoln's last speech. Now, for him, he didn't know it was his last speech. But at the speech, here's the messages he gives. He says, we should reunify. Okay, that's his theme always. We should offer voting rights to African Americans. This is the most progressive message he's ever given about voting rights for African Americans. So it shows how far he's come, right? Originally, he just wanted to hold the Union together. He wasn't quite sure about the slavery question. He didn't want it to spread, but he wasn't quite sure about equality. This last message, 3 days before he dies, he finally says, yeah, there should be equality for African Americans, these recently freed slaves. They should have the right to vote. Also, there should be public education for children of all races. A very progressive message. Who do you think is in the crowd at this time? John Wilkes Booth. It is. Now, this is a painting, but that is John Wilkes Booth right there. And I like what it showed. He's seething. Oh, anger. And he says to a friend on this day, that's the last speech he will ever make. And in fact, as history will go, 3 days later, Abraham Lincoln won't be able to give any more speeches. So here we have it, April 11th, 1865. This is how far I brought you. Now, let me take you to the day of days. Let's go to the theater, April 14th, 1865.
That's the day.
5 days after the surrender, Abraham Lincoln has given his jubilant speech where he's advocating equality. And finally, he's taking a breath, just like I need to do, wiping the sweat off his brow, just like I need to do. And he says, honey, let's go have date night. Let's go to the theater. Let's take a break. 5 long years now, 4.5, 5 long years now, we've been prosecuting a war. Let's take a break. So on April 14th, 1865, Lincoln decides to go to the theater. Now, Washington, D.C. at this time, there are 2 main theaters you could go to. One was called Grover's and one was called Ford's. Small town, you know, Alma here, right? Bacon County. We got the Bacon County Theater. Washington, D.C., they had 2 theaters. Grover's was showing the brand new, hot off the presses, must go see it play of Aladdin. Yes, that Aladdin, okay, on the stage, not in the movies, but on the stage, the story of Aladdin, just like Disney's animated classic, Aladdin. A lot of people thought Lincoln would want to see the new play, right? In fact, think about it. If the president's going to come to your theater, it's going to bring a lot of attention to your theater. So both of these theater houses were trying to get the president to come to theirs. Well, the other option was Ford's Theater. Ford's Theater was a little bit older, and it was showing a play that was on its 1,000th run. And that's kind of a big number for a play. And the tradition at the time period was if on the 1,000th run, it's a benefit performance for the main actor or actress. What that means is that they would get all the money from the tickets. So, you know, you do 1,000 plays and then you get kind of this big payday. Lincoln decided, I'm going to go to Ford's because I know the actress. Her name is Miss Laura Keene. And if I go to Ford's, it's probably going to attract more people to Ford's and she'll get more money for her 1,000th performance. So in a way, he was trying to do her a favor by going to Ford's Theater. The play at Ford's Theater on that night was Our American Cousin. Not a super popular story. Never got made into a Disney animated classic quite like Aladdin did. You've probably never heard it. I've never watched the whole play. But what you watched a few minutes of this morning was Our American Cousin. And the actors, the actresses you saw on the stage, they were telling that story. So just a little bit, you have watched Our American Cousin this morning as well. This is Ford's Theater in the 1860s. It is being a 3-story structure, it was larger than most. It certainly wasn't a skyscraper, but it was larger than most. What's something else we notice in this picture? What, some surrounding details, what do we see?
A carriage.
Okay, a carriage, yeah. So do you think they had a large parking lot for cars? Obviously not, right? People arrived on carriage, people arrived on foot. You know what they did have? They had stables for horses. Not a parking lot, but they had stables for horses. What do the streets look like? Yeah, dirt. Yeah, just dirt, floor, poor, you could say. Not a lot of pavement, not a lot of cobbled streets in the time period. So you think our country's capital is probably one of the more urban cities in the world? Not really the case. Washington, D.C. was dirt streets. And, the buildings are very close to each other. A lot of times that was a fire hazard. If one building caught fire, several buildings caught fire. So just a real picture of Ford's Theater. Let me take you inside. This is the inside of Ford's Theater today. All right, this has been refurbished and remodeled, and it's really been set up to look like the theater the night it was on Lincoln's assassination. So you can see the stage. You can see the, I'll come to this picture here as well. You can see where the seats would be. And what do you think the place with the flag and the gold drapery, what do you think that is? The presidential box. That's right. So if the president was attending the theater, that's where he would get to sit. If the president was not attending, it might go to the highest VIP, whoever was in attendance. But obviously on the night that Lincoln attends, that box is reserved for him. This again is the modern rendering of Ford's Theater, but we can see it's not cavernous. It's not 20,000 people. It's not a football stadium. It's a pretty intimate setting, right? Pretty small. The president's box is 12 feet above the stage. Now 12 feet, probably to Cassie, right? 12 feet's not that much. Cassie, can you hear my voice? Pretty clearly. Riley, Bagman, can you hear my voice? Pretty clearly. So imagine this. The president and then the actors, they're just 12 feet apart. A lot of times they would acknowledge the president. Good evening, Mr. President. And he might even wave back and say, hey, good to see you. Glad to be here. Point is, they could almost interact with each other. That's how close they were. Now, 12 feet up in the air. Has anybody ever jumped off of a rooftop?
Yes.
I'm sure some of y'all have tried to jump off a rooftop. Mufi, jump off of a rooftop. What's it do to your joints? Yeah, a little bit, and you're a young person. For me, it's going to definitely jar my knees and my hips and my back. 12 feet's a little bit far to jump, but it's also doable, right? Keep that in mind. All right, let me tell you who this story stars, the key players, the Lincolns, the Grants, the Rathbones, and of course, John Wilkes Booth. So I'm setting the stage for how this story goes down. The Lincolns, there they are, Mr. and Mrs. Abraham, and her name is Mary Todd. That's her maiden name, Mary Todd Lincoln. So I'll tell you a little bit about the Lincolns. They have not had an easy life. They've not had an easy marriage. They have not had an easy life. He suffers from, at the time, what would be known as melancholy, but today we would probably call that what? Yeah, depression. He suffers from bouts of depression. He's up, he's down, he's super low and super sad. As the president of the United States, don't you want your president to be kind of joyful, or at least not depressed? So that's something he struggles with. She, on the other hand, she is known to be manic. True mood swings, up and down, up and down. We might say the phrase today, bipolar. Gigi's crushing it up here. Yeah, so we have a depressive man and a bipolar wife. Their marriage was not super easy. Something else about her, she was very often into, she conducted seances in the White House. She was very spiritual, but not necessarily of the Christian perspective. And in the Christian country, a lot of people thought the president should also be a Christian. The Lincolns weren't exclusively Christians. I don't want to get into personal faith. I don't know that. But we do know that she conducted seances in the White House. She consulted spiritualists and mediums. And that was something that was kind of semi-controversial as well. Because, oh, wow, should you bring the occult into the White House? A lot of Americans didn't really appreciate that. They were not immune to tragedy. They had sons pass away in the year 1850. They lost a 4-year-old. 1862, and I hope we know our dates at this point. That's in the middle of, it's in the middle of the war. 1862, they lose their 11-year-old to disease. So the president's fighting the war. Obviously, he's thinking about the soldiers on the battlefield, and thousands of people are dying. But guess who also died? Their 11-year-old son. So they have personal tragedy. And that really sends both of them into different directions of a tailspin, right? He gets a low, she has the highs and the lows. It's difficult. It's a difficult time period for them. Of note, they will lose another son at age 18 in 1871. Now, President Lincoln has died, but Mrs. Mary Todd, she loses another young child. 3 of their 4 sons don't survive past the age of 18. Only their oldest, Robert, he lives to be age 83. So they have a lot of personal tragedy in their life. So you can imagine, amidst all of this, they kind of need a night at the theater, right? Hey, Mrs. Lincoln, let's go to the theater. Let's just take a break. Let's go to the theater. They're probably looking for a night out. So if you want to take a night out, parents, dating, I know you're young people, right? Sometimes you say, hey, let's double up, right? Let's double date. Anybody ever go on a double date? 14-year-olds, never mind. Sometimes parents say, hey, let's go on a double date. So who are you going to invite? Well, let's invite the General of the Army. Let's invite General Grant. He had just received the surrender of Lee. He was in Washington, D.C., so it was reasonable to say, hey, let's invite General Grant. Right-hand side there, that's his wife, Julia. I know we watched the video yesterday, and what's notable about her face?
Can't tell if she's looking at me or blue.
She got a lazy eye, so very often throughout her life, she only likes to be photographed from the side. Her lazy eye is the one you can't really see, and that's the way she wanted it. So Mr. and Mrs. Grant, General Grant and Julia Grant, Lincoln sends an invitation to them, and they decline. Can you imagine declining an invitation from the President of the United States? I mean, think about it. I don't care what you think about the President today, but you're a top general. He's the President, and he has invited you to a night on the town. What is it going to take for you to decline an invitation from the President? Why would you do that?
Not very much.
If someone dies.
Okay, personal tragedy, Mr. President, we can't make it. That's a good thought. What you got? Ooh, Blaze, you going the conspiracy route? General Grant was in on the conspiracy. That's a good thought. That's not the answer. But that's a good thought. You ready for the reason? Here's the reason. His wife didn't want to is true because she didn't like Mrs. Lincoln. These 2 women they catfight with each other. These 2 women didn't like each other. So Mrs. Grant says, Ulysses, you better decline that invitation. You better come up with some excuse. We are not going to the theater with that crazy woman. So their excuse is they're going to go visit their children in New Jersey. But really, the answer is these 2 Mrs. Grant didn't want to hang out with Mrs. Lincoln. So back to those small decisions that change history. What if Grant had been in the box that night? What if Booth had also been able to kill the top general in the Army? That would have been a double blow.
Well, that gun
Right?
can only shoot one
Well,
time.
good point. I'll get to that. Good point, and I'll get to that. That's a small thing that changed history. Grant not being in the box on that night. Well, so they go to like their second, third, and fourth choice, and they end up attending the theater with the Rathbones. This is Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancee, Clara Harris. They're not married, they're engaged. Major's a pretty low rank, right? To go from general to major, it's almost, in my opinion, it's almost like, oh man, who wants to go to the theater with us? We'll just invite the major. Now, Miss Harris, she was the daughter of a senator, so she kind of had a political connection. These are the two who actually attend the theater with Lincoln on that night. And that's notable that Major Harris, Major Rathbone, is in the box with Lincoln on that night. So I'll get to that point. Here's who actually goes to the theater. Now, our other anti-hero, if you will, John Wilkes Booth. Ladies, what do we think about him? Dreamboat? Good looking? Is it the mustache for you? The hair? Does anybody think he's good looking? No, you guys are like, no. Well, guess what? For his time, he was a good-looking man. What is his profession? I mean, we've said this a couple of. What is his
He was
profession?
an actor.
He was an actor. That's
so
right.
whenever he jumped out the
So
window,
as a
no one
stage
was doing it.
actor, he was known for his charm, his good looks. He was a good talker, a sweet talker, if you will. He very often carried, we can look backwards in history, he often carried multiple girlfriends at the same time. So he may have said he was with you, but he was also with her, you know what I mean? When he died, he had the pictures of 5 women in his pocket. So yeah, right. So the one girlfriend, like that one girl who thought that he belonged to her, no, he had five women pictures in his pocket at the time he died. How do you think I did? How do you think we did? Pretty close? Pretty close? Pretty close?
Your mustache is wrong.
My mustache is, it's curling the wrong direction. I should have flipped it upside down. Pretty close, guys. Come on now. It's public high school over here. A little bit more about John Wilkes Booth. So he's definitely a Southern sympathizer, right? Born in Maryland, a border state, but he is a Southern sympathizer. His journals, and I've read a lot of his personal writings, primary sources, right? His journals show that he's anti-North, pro-secession, pro-slavery, outright racist, okay? The man does not like slaves, does not like African Americans, sees them as a lower class, not even human. He is a bad man in his attitudes. He's 25 years old, right? He's a younger man. So sometimes your brain's not fully formed at 25. And I'm not saying that's anything about his racist persuasions, but sometimes when you're young and theatrical and flamboyant, you want to make a mark in history. And that was definitely John Wilkes Booth's attitude. He remained in the North due to his profession. You might think, we've said it a couple times, why the heck is this guy hanging out in Washington, D.C. if he's a Southerner? Well, it's because that's where he was getting jobs. That's where he was actually acting. He was very known at Ford's Theater. Okay? He was a regular actor at Ford's Theater. He is from a famous acting family, but he was the youngest and really kind of the least accomplished. So help me with some modern, like who is an acting family today? Multiple members of the family. The who? Miley Cyrus and her dad and some siblings. Okay, I'll buy that. The Cyruses.
I don't watch movies, so I don't know.
Here you got the Kardashians is a great example. Great example. Anyone else? I think Will Smith's family has multiple members of the family, right? Jada and Jaden and all that. How about? Well, I'll go here, then I'll give you my answer. Here are the Booth brothers. Okay, Edwin, Junius, and John. John is on the left-hand side without his mustache. This is the only time all 3 brothers were on the stage together. So they had separate careers, but sometimes they did cross paths together. They had one sister, but she was not involved in acting. Here's my example, who I think they're like. Anybody know Mark Wahlberg?
Yeah.
Bill Wahlberg. Did you know there's more than one Wahlberg? There is. These are the Wahlberg brothers. Mark, Donnie, and Paul. All 3 of them are actors, but we would probably say Mark Wahlberg on the right-hand side. He's the most accomplished. John Wilkes Booth was basically Donnie Wahlberg. Yeah, he was basically the least accomplished, youngest brother who was always trying to outdo his brothers. He wanted to make a name for himself. Like he wanted to be famous. But if he couldn't be famous, he was going to commit the crime of the century to become infamous. He wanted people to remember his name one way or another. And, well, here we are talking about him, right? We do remember his name, just not for the right reasons. All right, here's how it happened. I'm going to go over the door, the timing, the gun, the jump, the shout, and the escape. I'm going to do it about as fast as I can. This is the door to the presidential box. Much like I opened that door, and Miss Ross did a great job of helping me out as we had to monitor both classes. But much as I came through the door, and I did it slowly, but as I was in the room, what do you think I was doing before I actually pulled the trigger? Looking. So this is exactly what John Wilkes Booth did. Now, he didn't hang out in the box, but he looked through the door because Can you see that there? He drilled a peephole into the door the day of the crime. You see that lower right corner right there? He took a knife, a whittle, and he drilled a dime-sized hole into the peephole. I'm gonna stick here. He drilled a dime-sized hole into the door so that he could peek in before he entered the room. He wanted to see, okay, where exactly is he sitting? Is there someone else in there? Am I going to trip over something? Is there a chair? He wanted to look into the room before he actually entered and pulled the trigger. So this is one big way we know it's a premeditated crime, right? It was something he planned to do because he drilled that hole. Now, sometimes this gets brought up a lot. Where is the security guard? Why didn't the president have a security guard? The president had one security guard on that night, but that security guard, we've talked a lot about how security is just different in the time frame. Okay, he did not have full-on Secret Service. They didn't have metal detectors or anything like that. The security guard on that night, he was supposed to be sitting outside the door. He was. And a lot of people started to say, oh, he's part of a conspiracy. Here's what happened. He decided it was a 3-hour play. Oh, man, this play, again, is boring. I'm going to go downstairs to the tavern, get a drink. I'll just come up when the play is over. So he left his spot, and that leads to John Wilkes Booth being able to walk right into the room. Now, a lot of people are going to say, oh, he's part of the conspiracy, right? He got paid to leave, or he was a part of the conspiracy. That's why he left. He actually, this man, I don't know his name, but this man was cleared of any wrongdoing. Now, he was fired from his job because he's a bad security guard, but he was cleared of any wrongdoing. He was never arrested or implicated in the assassination. Question?
Abraham Lincoln went to the other theater when he got shot.
Great question. So she says if Abraham Lincoln went to the other theater, would he have gotten shot? Back to those small decisions that change history. The reason he, in going to Ford's Theater, he didn't announce his decision till the day of. So that morning, John Wilkes Booth is actually checking his mail at Ford's Theater. I'm glad you asked this question so I can throw this in there. John Wilkes Booth is checking his mail at Ford's Theater. He didn't have a permanent address. He actually just lived in a hotel, and his address was at Ford's Theater. So he's checking his mail, and he hears, oh, the president is coming to the theater tonight. We got to get the presidential box ready. And knowing that he is looking for an opportunity to get with to get near the president. He's like, this is it. This is my shot. So from the mid-morning when he gets this information, he puts his plan together very quickly. So that's a good question. If Lincoln had gone to Grover's, John Wilkes Booth's not checking his mail at Grover's, John Wilkes Booth probably doesn't shoot him on that night. So it could be in a very different situation, Blaze. That is a great question. This is 13-year-old Mr. Swanson with the door and a couple of other Lincoln artifacts. This is at Ford's Theater. You can visit today. You can visit the room, and then in the basement is a whole museum full of stuff from Lincoln and from the night of the assassination. So, because back in the day, you had to use those cameras that you when you click and then you advance the film, and maybe the picture came out, maybe it didn't. You didn't have digital pictures, you couldn't check them. That's why. It's the shoes for me. It's the shoes for me. All right, the timing. The timing of the shot is very important. This is Miss Laura Keene. Boys, I asked the ladies about John Wilkes Booth. So, gentlemen, what do we think about Miss Laura Keene? She looks a little older, right? If you ask me. She was the Julia Roberts of her day. Halle Berry. Who do you guys think is a big actress? Jennifer Aniston, right? She was the it actress of her day. Who'd you say? Actress, female. Oh. Halle Berry, Zendaya, right? She was the it actress of her day. Now, the dress, the hair, I know that's not what we think is sexy in the world today, but she was the it actress of her day. The timing, remember, she was on her 1,000th performance. So she's done this play before. She's earned a lot of money on this play. And this 1,000th performance, this is the actual program from that night. You see that starring Miss Laura Keene? For her, it was her big final performance, right? This is my 1,000th performance. She was on her A game, right? She was giving a good performance. There's a line in the play, which you probably didn't notice it at the time. But the very moment I snuck in here and I shot the gun, the confetti popper, it was exactly on this line. The line is, you sock-dologizing old man trap. Ha, 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 ha. That's good, Ryan. Ha, 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 ha. Now, what this means is basically like you nagging, grumpy old woman. Sock-dologizing old man trap. Not language we really use today. But this was a laugh line. This line always got a laugh from the audience. 100% every single time, reliably got a laugh from the audience. Why do you think John Wilkes Booth chose to shoot right at this line?
Because it's the loudest.
Because the audience's laughter was going to mask the sound of the gun. And as much as he was trying to put on a show, he also wanted the chance to escape. So he used sockdologizing old man trap, bang, he used that laugh line in order to cover his shot just a little bit. Another thing about this is he knew exactly when it was going to happen. He had it timed down to the minute. He wasn't even in the building when the play started. He says, oh yeah, that's in the third act. It's going to happen at about 10:14 p.m. I'll make my way up into the theater at about 10. So he knew down to the minute when this line was going to be said. And that's another piece of him, planning the whole assassination very specifically. So you sockdologizing old man trap, bang, and it might have looked something like that. All right, let's talk about the gun. This is the real gun. This is the single shot Derringer that was used to to assassinate Lincoln. It is a 44 caliber bullet, and it's often called a pocket cannon. Now, Rylan, hold that up. Hold that up. That's a little confetti gun, right? This Derringer is 5.8 inches long. Honestly, about the size of that little plastic thing right there, right? Hold it up, shake it around. Pretty small. Pocket size. That's important. Now, notable, it's single shot. Rylan, you made a great point. What if Grant was in the booth? He wouldn't have had another bullet, right? Booth could have used a lot of different weapons. He could have had multiple guns. He could have had a 6-shooter, right? He could have had a repeating pistol. Why do you think he used a single shot Derringer?
Probably because it was really quiet.
It was less powerful, so its gunpowder was less loud. That's true. He could conceal it. This is true, but again, it's very common for people to carry pistols in the time frame.
He could probably move a lot better with it.
Okay, I'll buy that. You know what? A little bit.
He can hide it a lot better because it's smaller.
Okay. Oh, one shot. I can't mess this up. Pretty close to that. I like those answers. Here's his stated reason: the Derringer is more theatrical. He was an actor to the very end. He wanted to have one shot, one kill. He wanted to be known as the assassin who only carried a single shot pistol. And even his conspirators were like, "Bro, take the 6-shooter." He's like, "No, the Derringer is more theatrical." So he was definitely an actor clear to the end. So there it is, single shot Derringer. Now, he also carried a knife. And when you ask, well, how would he have assassinated Grant? I pulled a knife from my belt there, right? He also had a knife, and that is a weapon he also used, and I'll tell you about that here in a second. There is the gun with 20-year-old Mr. Swanson, and I feel like that might have been the last thing Abraham Lincoln ever saw. Actually,
He didn't even see it.
Yeah, he didn't even see it because it got him behind the back.
He didn't even see it coming.
Yeah, but I don't know. There's the gun. Again, you can go and see this in the world today. All right, that's the gun. Here's the jump. Now, what happens in the booth? Booth opens the door. He pulls the gun. He shoots Lincoln behind the back left ear. It's actually not a very powerful shot. It does not go through Lincoln's face. It does not blow his brains out. It gets stuck in his head. Okay, and we'll talk about that from the medical side here in just a second. But what he does is, who else is in the booth?
The wife.
A wife, a girlfriend, and Major Henry Rathbone. So now imagine this. You're a major in the United States Army. You've been fighting a war for 5 years. You are there, and the president has just been attacked. On your honor, you think you got to do something about it? Yeah, I'm a man. I'm in the army. I got to take on this invader, right? He's invaded the box. I got to take him on. So Henry Rathbone does try to do that. He tussles with Booth. Booth pulls his knife and slashes at Rathbone. He slashes him right across the forearm. He doesn't hit any big veins or arteries, but Rathbone does get a pretty good slash and starts bleeding. So it kind of looks like Rathbone has also been hit. But it's for Rathbone, it's not going to be mortal, right? It's not going to be fatal. It's not going to kill him. Booth then, he had this plan the whole time, jumps from the box. Now, looking at this picture here, I'll go to this one. I like it as well. A little bit more modern. You can see that there's the flag there, right? This is what the presidential box would have looked like. Portrait of George Washington, because they were always honoring the first president of the United States. The flag, kind of bunched up like that, is called bunting. Well, Booth, when he planned to jump from the box, he planned to land on the stage. He was going to say this last line, and then he was going to escape. Problem is, foot gets caught in the cloth. So we don't know whether he tripped or whether his boot spur got caught. One way or another, he does stumble a little bit. And movie already asked you, when you jump from 12 feet, I mean, that's hard enough. Now imagine landing a little bit off balance. What do you think could happen? He breaks his left leg. Hairline fracture, or, we don't know if it's a full break or a hairline fracture, but one way or another, he's hobbled. So now he's on the stage, but his leg hurts. Now he can't really move around quite as fast. So he does say his last line, and then he hobbles off the stage because he is injured. So the jump is theatrical, but it's also harmful to Booth because it hurts him. The line, so the shout rather, he makes his jump. And on the stage, one last time, he knows this is his last performance. He knows this is the last time he'll ever be on stage. He says, sic semper tyrannis, which I don't expect you to know what that means because it's in Latin. But can you take a guess? One of those words might be kind of English. Sic semper tyrannis. What do you think that word is? Looks pretty close to the English word. Tyrant. Yes. What it means is thus always to tyrants. And this is actually a play that comes from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. And basically what it means is you get what you get. If you're a tyrant, you deserve to die. Thus always to tyrants. So what he's saying is Lincoln is a tyrant. I shot him because he deserved it. Sic semper tyrannis, thus always to tyrants. And from there, he said sic semper tyrannis. And then the audience is kind of mixed on what he says next. He either said the South is avenged or the South will rise again. Either way, he is definitely declaring his Southern loyalties. The South is avenged. The South will rise again. All right, now the escape. So he hobbles off the stage. And this is where the conspiracy starts to go into place. He has a man holding his horse. He hops on the horse. Now, the man holding his horse, he probably didn't know what was going on. He was probably not a part of the shooting. He was literally just kind of holding the horse. But because he's holding the horse, he is going to be arrested later. So the man holding the horse, Booth hops on the horse, and he starts to race out of town. Now, Washington, D.C. at the time, they were on a 10 p.m. curfew. All the roads in and out of Washington, all the bridges in and out of Washington, they're supposed to be shut down at 10 p.m. Booth arrives at the edge of town a little after 10, about 10:05. And he acts like a normal passerby. Okay, there's soldiers at this bridge. If they did their job, they would have not let him across, right? Back to those small things that change history. If they did their job, they should have not let him across. But word had not spread yet. Okay, there's not text messages, there's not cell phones. Word did not quite spread to the edge of town yet that the president had been shot. So Booth, on his horse, he's like, hey, oh man, it's past 10 o'clock. Listen, I'm just trying to get home for the night. I'm sorry, listen, I won't break curfew again. Can you just let me across? What do you think soldiers did? Let him across. What they did was they let the assassin escape town. They didn't know he was the assassin. They're not a part of the conspiracy, but they let the assassin escape town. And from that escape, Booth is going to be on the run for the next 12 days. It's going to take 12 days to actually hunt him down and capture him. Question?
How long did it take for the whole theater to know that?
Great question. I'm getting right there. So now, this is the headline. Lincoln has been shot. The shout starts to go out across town. The president has been shot. Lincoln has been shot. Inside the theater, there was a pause and then chaos. Because a lot of people thought he was actually a part of the show. The bullet, the gunshot wasn't heard by most people. When this man is jumping from the box, even though most people knew it wasn't a part of the play, okay, because this play was on its 1,000th run, they thought this might be an extra special thing that's happening because the president's here. I mean, it was extra special. It just wasn't the good kind of special. So a lot of people in the audience just sat there. That happens a lot sometimes, right? If someone collapses, heart attack, how often does the crowd just kind of stand there, right? And then the medical professionals should go into action, but the crowd just sat there. They let him get away. Nobody stopped him. What if one person had tackled him, right? What if one person had tried to stop him? But a good point. So a good point there. Eventually, from the presidential box, his wife says, the president has been shot. She shrieks it out. The president has been shot. At which point, people go into action, trying to take care of the president. Now, today, a lot of people ask, could he have survived his wounds today? It's possible. We'll never know for sure, right? But with modern medicine, it was not a fatal shot to his brain immediately. But with the technology of the day, the medicine of the day, he really didn't have much of a chance. Ryland, a question? We're gonna blast through it for a second here, all right? Just hang in there. What they do is they take him. They believe that he should not die in the theater. Okay, here's a little hard for us to believe maybe today. Theaters were considered houses of ill repute. Good Christian gentlemen didn't go to the theater because bad things happened at the theater. I don't know what you believe about the theater today, but that was the belief of the time. It was also April 14th, also Good Friday. Good Friday leading into Easter weekend. And a lot of people thought it was kind of scandalous that the president was at the theater and not at church. So immediately people said, this man should not die in the theater. Some people said, let's take him to the White House. White House was about 8 blocks away, but on cobbled streets with a horse and buggy, it would have rattled his body and rattled his brain. He never would have survived. So they said, let's at least just get him across the street. Across the street is what's known as the Peterson boarding house. basically a hotel, maybe like a bed and breakfast, kind of a long-term boarding house. They take him into an empty room. Someone is staying in this room, right? But he's not at the room right then. So they just flop him into the bed. They say, this is the president's room now. And this is a picture of what that night looked like. Now, not everybody was gathered around him at the same time, but in and out of the room throughout that night were several leaders of the government. His wife was actually inconsolable. She was weeping and sobbing and just, she couldn't get control of her emotions. She actually left the room, right? She was carried out of the room because she was causing such a ruckus. Several leaders of government there, military leaders, just kind of representative of them being around the president's bed in his last hours. He does hang on until 7:22 a.m. the next day. What's up?
Go back to those
I will.
Okay, so you got him laying there, and then
Yep.
you got the 3 guys right behind him to
Yep.
the left.
Yep.
Is that third, that 4th guy, is that John?
No. John Wilkes Booth not in this picture. Several military. This is the Secretary of War. A couple of these are his doctors. This is his wife. I think that's the Secretary of the Navy, if I remember correctly. Obviously, these are a couple of military guys. Just leaders of the government. Leaders of the government. Question?
Did when, what's his face, the major or whatever, realized that he was shot, did he, try to go after them? Or,
Good question. So, yeah, Rathbone tussled with him, but when Booth jumped, and some people think maybe Rathbone might have contributed to the fall, but he didn't. Rathbone didn't jump after him. No. Good question. Rathbone's going to struggle with that for the rest of his life, and I'll tell you how his story ends up. It's kind of sad. What we got here?
Yeah, sorry, sir.
You're fine.
This Blaze is 3 out of 5.
Got it. No more. Thanks. He does. So Lincoln stays alive till 7:22 a.m. the next day. That's when his doctor reports, gives a time of death. And the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, he said the room is quiet. Nobody really knows how to react. Edwin Stanton breaks the silence. He says, now he belongs to the ages. As if to say he is now one of history's great figures. And the picture here, this is the picture that was really popular at the time. Who is receiving him into heaven? Can you tell? Not God.
George Washington.
George Washington, yeah. So it's almost like the angels in heaven, God, yeah, and George Washington is receiving him into heaven. This is why we put Lincoln and Washington together a lot. They were the 2 core leaders, Washington being first, Lincoln leading us through the Civil War. So a lot of people associate Washington and Lincoln together, and obviously we're about to have President's Day weekend. This is the bed where Lincoln died. This photograph was taken after his body was moved, but you can just kind of see how chaotic that room probably was. Messy, small, cramped. You know what's crazy? The dude who was renting the room, he comes back a day later and finds out the president died in his bed, and he just continues living in that room. I don't know if he changed the sheets or not. He just continues.
What the?
Different perspectives on hygiene and cleanliness and all that kind of stuff back in the 1800s.
And that would have a lot of
What's that? Lincoln was not the first president to be assassinated, is correct.
Who was?
No, I'm sorry, let me tell you that. Lincoln was the first president to die as assassinated. He was not the first president to have an attempted assassination. To die of assassination. Yes, Lincoln was the first president to die of assassination. However, when I think about Secret Service, like every time that the president has been attacked, how come we didn't increase Secret Service, right? We know Jackson had 2 attempts on his life. So Lincoln is assassinated, Garfield is assassinated, McKinley is assassinated. That's when Secret Service really gets ramped up. And then, of course, later, Kennedy is going to be assassinated. So Lincoln is the first to die of assassination.
Hey, look.
How did the country kind of go into
I'll pull it.
Yeah. So
they know what to do?
the country definitely, great question. Hang on to it. She asked, did the country go into a panic with the assassination? Hang on to it. It's a big part of the story. This is the Peterson boarding house today. You can go visit it, right? You can go to the Ford's Theater and you can just walk across the street and they have the room set up much like it was the night that Lincoln died. So again, you can see how cramped it would be. Pretty bad wallpaper if you ask me. This is where President Lincoln died. This is the only picture of Lincoln in death. So the Secretary of War actually ordered no photographs will be taken of the president's corpse. He did not want anyone to remember him as dead. He wanted them to remember him as alive and strong and a good leader. So he wanted no pictures taken of Lincoln's corpse. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, do not Google Lincoln's dead body. There are fake pictures on the internet. They're fake. Just because a corpse has a beard and kind of has a long chin doesn't make it Lincoln. Okay, there's a lot of fake pictures of dead Lincoln on the internet. This is the only true photograph of Lincoln in death. And you can tell, you can barely see the body, but you can see his face, you can see his beard. This photograph was taken against the secretary's orders. But when the secretary found out these photos got taken, he was very angry. He said, that photographer did not have permission to take pictures. Give me the negatives. You guys know what negatives are? Right? Old-timey pictures got printed on a negative. So he takes the negatives. He destroys all but one of them. Because even he knows we need to keep this picture for history. This negative is not discovered until 1952. So this picture is lost for about 100 years, 90 years. It's discovered in 1952, at which point I guess we could say that the world deserves to see this picture. So here's a true picture of Lincoln in
Who
death.
found it?
Good question. So Chloe great question. A 14-year-old boy who was doing research at a library was shuffling through some files, and this negative was in a file that had not been seen for decades. And this 14-year-old boy was like, this looks pretty interesting. We should look at it, and discovered this picture. So it goes to show you that
Did he get money for it?
anyone can be a historian. I don't know if there was money involved or not. Chloe asked, how did the country react to this? Well, in the immediately after his death, the country was actually really united around him. Even people in the South, they were like, whoa, this is not how we wanted the war to end. Listen, shooting the president, that's not what we're going for. John Wilkes Booth thought he was going to be hailed as a hero. In fact, he was condemned by a lot of Southerners. He thought he would be received into safety. Like, if I can make it to the South, they'll protect me. That's not the case. Not a lot of people wanted to help him on his escape. So Lincoln's body goes on a very lengthy funeral procession from Washington, D.C., all the way to his home state of Illinois, where he's buried in Illinois. And all along those train tracks, hundreds of thousands of people came out to wave and kind of see his funeral train go by. So there was a great unity in the country afterwards. A little bit of chaos in terms of who's the president now,
That's what I mean, like,
but there was a great, good. That's a good, and I'll get to that side of it as well. 13-year-old Mr. Swanson with the bugle that was played at Lincoln's funeral.
You
So
look
again,
cute,
yeah, right.
baby.
Hey, I took a trip at age 13 and got to see a lot of things. And I always say that if you can go to Washington, D.C., you should. But wait, there's more. So we're going to talk now about the conspirators, the manhunt, the capture, and you guys always like blood and guts, right? The trials and the executions. So there we have it. Now there's a murderer on the run, $50,000 reward. That's a lot of money. And some conspirators. So let's talk about more than just John Wilkes Booth. Let's talk about who else was involved. These are the conspirators. Okay, there's 4 others who eventually pay for their crime. And let's talk about them one at a time. First, this is David Harold. David Harold, and this is where your notes pick up on what was their role for each of them. David Harold helped Booth escape Washington. David Harold was a nobody. He was starstruck by John Wilkes Booth. He was basically a fanboy. Is that a phrase I can use? Y'all, you kids say that phrase? He was a fanboy of the famous John Wilkes Booth. So as Booth has these various ideas, let's kidnap the president, let's assassinate the president, Harold's like, yeah, man, I'll do whatever you want. I'm here for you. I'm here for you. Harold helps Booth escape Washington, and he is with Booth for the next 12 days of the entire manhunt. So you could probably say he was the one who was closest to Booth and spent the most time with Booth. Next up here, this is Lewis Powell. Ladies, what do we think about him?
He's a cute.
It's kind of cuter, right? I mean, now this is a colorized photo, which I think is amazing, by the way. Whoever's figured out how to colorize these black and white photos, I think that's awesome for history. Lewis Powell is often called the hot convict or the hot criminal. I've seen it on the internet before, kind of weird. But he was younger. He was a brute. He was tall. He was strong. He's the only one who was actually a soldier in the war. Of the conspirators, he's the only one who was actually a soldier in the war. He fought in the Confederate Army. He was from the state of Florida. He was in a couple of key battles, but he was not in the Army at the time of this. He had already gotten out of the Army. He is assigned to murder the Secretary of State, William Seward. There's another picture of him. So this goes to show you, to Blaze's point here, there were several people supposed to be murdered at the same time. Now, Lincoln is the only one who actually died. But Booth's plan was, hey, if we can take out the top 3 leaders in the country at the same time, we'll cut off the head of the Union. There will be chaos, and maybe, just maybe, we can keep fighting the war. So Powell is supposed to go attack and kill Secretary of State William Seward. This is William Seward. He's an older man. He's probably no match for Lewis Powell, who's young and strong. Here's what happens. Powell knocks on the door of the Secretary of State. Knock, knock, knock. The door is open, so he has access now. He immediately punches at the butler, storms up the stairs. Seward is in his bedroom, right, at nighttime. Storms up the stairs, beats the guy's son, throws his daughter out of the way. He does spare the daughter, and then starts attacking the Secretary of State who's in his bed. He does a lot of punching and stabbing before he's subdued by an army sergeant. There was a bodyguard in the house. So he gets subdued by the sergeant and then and kind of, taken into custody after that. He thinks he kills Seward. Seward doesn't die. It's pretty amazing. He probably should have died. He's got a lot of facial lacerations and abrasions and punches, but he doesn't die. Now, he's hurt for a long time, but he doesn't die. So Lewis Powell does not successfully complete his mission. Next up, this is George Atzerodt. George Atzerodt was a German immigrant. Okay, so he wasn't born in America. He came to America from Germany. He is assigned to murder the Vice President, Andrew Johnson. That's Andrew Johnson. So back to Chloe's big point here. What would the country do? President is dead. Well, guess what? If the Vice President was also assassinated, there really would have been a lot of chaos. Here's back to just a lack of security for the time period. The Vice President lived in a hotel. He lived in a hotel called the American Hotel. George Atzerodt, all he was supposed to do, knock, knock, knock on the Vice President's hotel door. No security. The Vice President would open the door, and he's supposed to shoot him in the face. That was his job. But he spends the night drinking at a bar. He loses his nerve. He never even goes to the Vice President's room. So the Vice President survives the attack, I guess you could say, because he was never attacked in the first place. So George Atzerodt, a lot of times he is considered maybe on the Asperger's spectrum, maybe even autistic. There wasn't like a diagnosis for mental illness back then quite like today, but those who have studied him say he probably wasn't all with it, and that is maybe why he followed John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth was always looking for followers, but in the end, he doesn't follow through with his mission, so the Vice President, Andrew Johnson,
why'd he get in trouble?
survives. Why what?
Why'd he get in trouble if he didn't do that?
Because he was a part of the conspiracy. Good question. Why did he get in trouble if he didn't do anything? He knew about it. He planned to do it. And at the time, we just needed people to get in trouble for the crime, right? As a country, we wanted people to be held accountable. So good point. Good point. Did he pull the trigger? No. Did he know about the conspiracy? Yes. All right, next up, Mary Surratt and her son, John. Now, what do you think is notable about Mary? She's a she. A lot of people actually had a hard time believing that a woman could be involved with a murder plot, right? And it's kind of back to the, sexism of the day. Men committed murder, not women. Well, Mary Surratt, she ran a boarding house where a lot of the conspirators met. Her son, John, he's in the lower right there. He was a part of the plot, but he was actually out of the country on the day of the assassination. He's in Canada. So they couldn't arrest him because he wasn't in the country. He did not participate on the night of, but he was a part of Booth's clan. He was a part of the bigger plot. Well, in the end, since they can't arrest John, they decide to arrest Miss Mary. Now, she did know about the plans. She did hold weapons and equipment for them. They met in her house, and she was probably, I think we're doing notes, she was probably a part of the plot, but she didn't pull. So to Ryland's question, how responsible is she? She didn't pull triggers. She didn't slash anyone. She didn't hold it. She didn't facilitate anyone's escape, but she knew about it. She knew about it. So she gets arrested because she knows about it. What's that? She's an accomplice. Chloe? She is guilty by association. Yeah. Atzerodt had a mission, but he didn't carry it out, so he's guilty by association. Lewis Powell, he actually slashes the Secretary of State, and then of course Booth is his own guy. Yep. Well, David Harold helps with the escape. So you guys have kind of walked through 4 of the 5. Here's the manhunt now. Here's the escape. This is Ford's Theater. This is Washington, D.C. Booth goes on a long and winding 12-day escape. He's got to cross the river at one point right here. In the end, I'll get to the end here, he's captured in Maryland right here at the farm of somebody who's truly not involved at all, right? This family whose barn he was in, they didn't know about the plot. They didn't even know who was on their farm. I'll get to that here in just a second. But you can see kind of a long and winding escape route. In the end, it's 90 miles. So he had to travel 90 miles on bad foot. Even riding a horse, that's still going to hurt your leg, hurt your foot. He makes a whole bunch of errors, right? Navigational errors. They have to try to cross the river twice because they pick a bad crossing point. Whole lot of issues for John Wilkes Booth. Basically, he's not a good criminal. He's not a very smooth criminal, if you will. And that's ultimately that's a reason he kind of didn't get caught. The whole story is packaged into two great books. One is called Manhunt, and then kind of a youth version is called Chasing Lincoln's Killer.
I read that.
Raise a hand if you've read Chasing Lincoln's Killer in Miss Ivy's class. Good. So hopefully you got some familiarity with everything that I've been saying. One more character for you. This is Dr. Samuel Mudd. Dr. Samuel Mudd was visited by John Wilkes Booth on the night of the assassination. See, with his hurt leg, he needed some medical care. Samuel Mudd lives in Maryland. Okay, so he's a Southern sympathizer. That's a border state, but he's a Southern sympathizer. He knew Booth before the assassination. Okay, they did connect with each other before the assassination. On the night of the assassination, here's what he says happened. He receives a knock at the door at midnight. He's got a visitor at his house. This happens a lot to him, right? You know, he gets patients who need help. He claims, Mudd will claim, he had no idea who was at his door. I had a midnight visitor. I didn't know who it was. I helped him because he had a need. What he does is he sets Booth's broken leg. He gives him a bit of a splint, but he cuts his boot off. He wraps it. He gives him a splint and sends him on his way. He will claim he did not know who he was dealing with. I didn't know it was John Wilkes Booth. I didn't know this man had just shot the president. I was just helping someone who needed help. So Mudd is going to be arrested. Okay, I'll go to here. Here's some artifacts from Mudd. That's actually Booth's boot that he cut off, and it was at Mudd's house. So we know Booth was there because his boot was there. That's Mudd's doctor's kit, and he gets arrested. So those are his handcuffs and leg irons. He is truly guilty by association, right? As you guys have said that phrase, guilt by association. But some people think he knew about the whole plan. Some people think it was just bad that he got caught up into it by helping Booth. So that's one of those, that's one of those confusing things. Is he truly responsible or not? Now, let me ask you this. Dr. Mudd lives on in the world today in our language. Have you ever heard the phrase slinging mud?
Yeah.
Slinging mud at each other? Or they drug my name through mud, something like that. Now, when you hear that phrase, you're probably thinking about dirt, right? We're throwing dirt at each other, throwing mud at each other. The phrase actually comes from his last name. And what it means is you've been accused of something that you're not guilty of. Or they're trying to tarnish my name, dragging me through the mud. I know it sounds like the dirt. And that phrase, I mean, it fits. But it's actually referencing Dr. Samuel Mudd. To be accused of something that you're not guilty of is to be like having your name drugged through Dr. Samuel Mudd, the mud. Is that a hand question? What you got?
Why the dates on it?
Those are his birth and death dates, is all. He was born in 1833.
Why the year ain't changed?
Why what?
The year ain't changed.
It's
What?
33 and 83.
33 and 83. 33 and 83.
Why didn't you check my eye?
My man. All right, let's get to the end here. The capture. So here's how Booth is actually captured. 12 days later, he's holed up in an old tobacco barn at a family. The family farm is named Garrett. Okay, it's the Garrett's farm. The Garrett family, they're Southern sympathizers, but I genuinely believe they did not know who was at their farm. See, word is spreading across the countryside, but some families don't get the news. Some families haven't heard yet. So the Garretts, it was very normal in the time period for some weary travelers to come up and say, hey, can we stay with y'all tonight? Can we get a meal? Like, we're just weary travelers, especially soldiers who were leaving the war. A lot of Confederate soldiers going home. Like, we're weary Confederate travelers. You know, we used to be in the army. We just need a place to sleep. We just need a meal. So that's what the Garretts thought that they were hosting. It was David Harold and John Wilkes Booth. They thought that they were just helping out. So I don't believe the Garretts are involved in the conspiracy, except for the fact that John Wilkes Booth was finally caught at their farm. See, the Union troops are on a big manhunt. John Wilkes Booth is the most wanted man in America. Big reward for him, big money reward for his capture. So a lot of people want to find him, capture him, and cash in on the money, right? So eventually the detectives come to the Garrett farm, and they bring a lot of soldiers with them. Booth and Harold are inside the barn. The Union soldiers surround the barn and say, come out with your hands up, right? Come out with your hands up. We got you surrounded. Booth says, not today. I ain't doing it. So what do? If they're not going to come out of the barn, they light it on fire. Booth lights the barn on fire. The soldiers light the barn on fire, trying to push Booth out of the barn. At that point, Harold says, John, I love you. I've been with you for 12 days now, but I'm out. I'm leaving. Harold leaves the barn. He gets arrested, and eventually it's not going to work out for him because he's going to get executed. Booth stays in the barn. Booth stays in the barn until he is shot by a young Army corporal named Boston Corbett. This is Boston Corbett right there. Ladies, it's the hair, like the split right down the middle. It's kind of nasty. Yeah. Now, the deal was the Secretary of War wanted Booth to be taken alive. Because an alive guy can do what? Talk, but a dead guy can't tell you any stories. So they want to take Booth alive. Corbett, however, he's the soldier on the right hand of the picture there. He's got his gun trained on the barn. He claims that Booth raised a gun towards him. And hey, if someone's pointing a gun at you, what you going to do?
Shoot.
Fire in self-defense. So he claims he fired in self-defense. He hits Booth in the throat. Does not kill him immediately, but over the course of the next few hours, there's Corbett. I don't think he's on your page, is he? Yeah, Corbett's not on your page. Union soldier shoots Booth in the throat. The soldiers were not supposed to shoot at Booth, but he claims that Booth aimed a gun at him. Booth gets shot in the throat. He bleeds out over the next several hours. His last words are, "Tell my mother I died for my country." To the last breath, he really believed he was fighting for the Confederate cause. He really believed. He never joined the army. But he says, "I did the last brave thing in the war. Tell my mother I died for my country." He also, this is not on the screen, he also writes this. He writes this in his journal, and he did a lot of journaling during the manhunt. He knew that people were eventually going to read his journals, and he wanted his thoughts to be written down. So he wrote, "Our country owed all her troubles to him, Lincoln, and God simply made me the instrument of his punishment." He really believed that God told him to assassinate Abraham Lincoln, and that's probably pretty crazy. Let's finish the story here. The trials and the execution. Now, I'll tell you, there's going to be some real hanging pictures here, so if you want to put your head down and not look at them, that's fine. Although I'll say my 6th grade daughter has seen these pictures as well, right? When you read that book, you've probably already seen these pictures. I'm just letting you know, if you don't want to see the pictures, you can put your head down, or you can go ahead and look at them because they're history. These are the 4 co-conspirators, right? The 4 that we've already talked about. And again, we can just see them there. These are the gallows where they will be hung. They are hung on July 7th, 1865. The death certificate reads, or rather the execution certificate reads, "You will be hung by the neck until dead." And they were. This is a real photograph of all 4 co-conspirators hanging by the neck until dead. What do we notice about character on the far left? Who do you think that is?
That's that woman.
That's the woman, right? Mrs. Surratt.
Her rope's about to break.
And it remained controversial to the moment that the gallows dropped. Many people were even shouting for her release. "Don't hang Miss Surratt." One of the co-conspirators, David Harold, he says, "Don't hang Miss Surratt. She didn't do anything. Hang the rest of us, but don't hang Miss Surratt. She didn't do anything." Well, her appeal was not overturned, and she did hang. You see, they got a canvas bag over their face. That was very normal for the time period. You didn't, you covered the victim's face. I shouldn't say victim, but you covered the criminal's face because you didn't want to see the expression they made when they were dead. And that is the justice for Abraham Lincoln right there. And it happened about just 3 months after his death. So that's pretty fast. Think about the death row today. Someone commits a murder and they go to trial, and it just takes years before they actually get their punishment. This happened within 3 months. Pretty fast. So in the end, there were 8 charged, 4 executed, 3 were given life sentences, to include Samuel Mudd. 1 was given a 6-year sentence. That's the guy who just held the horse. All of them who were sent to jail, even those with a life sentence, they were released by 1867. Part of Reconstruction was paroling people who had committed crimes under the Confederacy. So even though they were part of assassinating the president, they served 2 or 3 years in jail. Not that big of a consequence for really being a part of the conspiracy to assassinate the president. All right, I've talked a lot. We're going to start a video. We're going to roll it into tomorrow as well. Okay. This is a TV show called Timeless, and I want to set it up for you. We'll watch a little bit of it, and we'll roll it into tomorrow as well. Timeless, we got our characters here. This is Lucy in the middle, Wyatt on the left, Rufus on the right. They are a part of their group of scientists who are able to time travel. Okay, I know we got to suspend reality a little bit. They're able to time travel. They go back in history, and their goal is to preserve history. Lucy is actually a historian. Her goal is to preserve history, the good parts of history and the bad parts of history, right? She just doesn't want history to change. However, I'm telling you a little bit about the show here just so you can understand the story. There's also the bad guys. Isn't there always the bad guys? This is Garcia Flynn. He works for the bad guys, who in the movie are called Rittenhouse. It's kind of like the Illuminati, the rich, the wealthy. They're trying to change history to their favor. They try to change history for their agenda. Also, we have Wyatt, who's the soldier, and Rufus, he's the techie guy who actually pilots the time machine. I know, there's not any real time machines in the world, but for the video here, it's kind of fun to watch. Their time machine is called the lifeboat. They travel back in time, and they very often encounter the bad guys, and that's part of the show. Lucy wants to preserve history, Rittenhouse wants to change history, and that gives us the show. So let's see what happens when we go back in time, April 14th, 1865. We cross paths in Washington, D.C. What could possibly go wrong? I'm just going to say it up front. We're bypassing our bathroom break today. It's just one of those days where I got a little bit more going on. And if you need to go to the bathroom in your next block, you can do that. Rylan, what's your question?
I didn't go to the bathroom.
You're good.
No, I'm not. It's Mountain Dew's about to come out
I
on the
believe
floor.
you. You what?
It's Mountain Dew's about to be in the floor.
300 plates, only lost one.
What do you know about Lincoln?
I'm his bodyguard. Where's your gardening? Next door watching the play.
Hey, Mr. Booth. You've been asking when we're gonna be seeing you on the stage again.
Soon.
But I'm spilling over with affections, which I am ready to pour over you like applesauce over roast pork.
But you are not used to the manners of good society, and that alone will excuse the accidents of which you are guilty.
Don't know the manners of good society, eh?